I think Gladiator Beast can be a strong contender in modern day Edison format. Here's how. So for the monsters, I played 2 copies of Gladiator Beast Darius. The reason why I'm playing 2 copies of Darius is because he's really good in the grind game, being able to revive a Gladiator Beast monster from the graveyard, be it either a Quarry or a Bestiary, can allow you to tag into your powerful fusion monsters. Additionally, the stat line of Darius being 1700 is actually pretty good. He can run over cards like Armageddon Knight, and despite crashing with Bora and Greffer, 1700 is still an okay stat line in Edison format. So we're playing 2 copies more so for the utility as opposed to actually wanting to draw specifically Darius. Similar concept with Equest. We play 2 copies of Bequest also because he's good in the grind game by allowing to add back Gladiator Beast cards from the graveyard to our hand. Oftentimes our Gladiator Beast monsters are in our deck because we shuffle them back using their effects so they're not in the graveyard. Or if we attack into something like a Dimensional Prison, they get banished as opposed to going to the grave. But a good usage for a quest is to grab back War Chariot from our graveyard, which is our monster negate. Looping War Chariot with a quest is a common way to win with the Gladiator Beast deck. Additionally, when we have free Gladiator Beast monsters and we're tagging them out, a common play you do is you actually summon Myrmilio to pop your own monsters and then get them back with the quest. This way you can save a Gladiator Beast monster in your hand, usually being a Bestiary, so you can next turn summon this, or set it and tag into a Gaiceras. So there's some really cool plays you can do with the quest, but again, like Darius, we're playing 2 copies because he's good as a resource, but we don't really want to draw a quest as opposed to any other name. Just 1 copy of Laquari. Laquari is a good GB to summon, seeing as he goes up to 2100, not being able to be attacked over by a Sirocco. Laquari does come up when you want to make Gladiator Beast Heraklinos, which is their Spell and Trap Negate fusion monster. However, Laquari is easily accessible, and even if it does get banished, we still have multiple ways to win the game. So I don't think 2 copies of Laquari is necessarily a must. I'm also playing a spell card in this deck which makes me see my Gladiator Beast monsters much more frequently. Thus, I was able to cut down on my Gladiator Beast names. And Laquari was the worst one that I could find. Then I'm playing 1 copy of Bestiary. This is by far the best Gladiator Beast monster, seeing as he's able to tag out into Gaiceras, which really is the reason to play the deck. Gaiceras is a very powerful boss monster. Additionally, Bestiary can allow us to remove Black Whirlwind, or pick apart your opponent's back row, thus making Bestiary a vital piece for your grind game. Just make sure not to summon this blindly into a bottomless trap hole, unless you either have a way to protect it with Book of Moon, or you have a read that their back row is not a bottomless trap hole. And for the last level 4 Gladiator Beast monster, I'm playing 1 copy of Secutor. I have tried both Gladiator Beast variants with and without this card, but I can tell you that the Gladiator Beast deck without Secutor often lacks a good turn-free play. I often find myself summoning Secutor at the end of my battle phase if I have just 1 GB, as opposed to just going for a safe Laquari, because as long as I can protect my Secutor with my trap cards, and ensure that my Secutor effect can go off next turn, be it either with a Boku or Book of Moon, I can put myself so far ahead that I can usually just immediately win the game from there. If I can on my 3rd turn resolve a Secutor effect to summon 2 GBs from my deck, that amount of advantage such early on in the game usually ends up snowballing you into later turns, and your opponent just cannot come back from that. So whilst he cannot tag out himself, thus making him a dead draw, he's one of the most vital Gladiator Beast monsters in your deck. Next I play 2 copies of Gladiator Beast Retiari. With the meta being so graveyard reliant in Edison format, be it Frogs or Vayu, you really need the Retiaris in your deck to be able to ensure you can beat those matchups in the long run. Whilst I often take this card out against decks like Hero Beat in favor for a Hoplimus, having 2 Retiaris in game 1 to hedge against the most prevalent decks and also the strongest decks in the format, I think is very important. There are even situations where you summon 2 Retiaris at the same time when you do your tag outs. That situation may be a bit more niche, but you really want to make sure that you have at least 1 in deck, and that's why I'm playing 2 copies of Retiari. Then I'm playing 1 copy of Sam Knight. Sam Knight is sort of like a balanced copy of Secutor. When he's summoned by a GB and destroys a monster by battle, you can search for any Gladiator Beast card, trap or monster. That effect doesn't come up that often, seeing as if you can resolve a GB tag out into another tag out, you usually just end up going for the Secutor. But the Sam Knight is a level 3 beast, which makes it important for one of our other cards in our deck. And for the last Gladiator Beast monster, I play 1 copy of Myrmillo. Myrmillo is a good way to deal with established fields, being able to destroy any monster on summon. But it's extremely low attack power, and the fact that you usually tag into Murmillo with your Test Tigers to destroy a monster makes it so you don't need to play multiple copies of this card. Then for the non-GBs, I play 3 copies of Test Tiger. Whilst being very weak to Royal Oppression, Test Tiger is an important tool to be able to use your effects immediately. There are multiple ways in this deck to utilize Test Tiger, either be it tagging out the GB to summon a Sekidor and get its effect off, or pair the Test Tiger with the 2 copies of Prisma we play in our deck. A play you can do with the 2 copies of Prisma we play in our deck is you can normal summon it to send a Bestiary from your deck to the grave. Then you can summon Test Tiger since you control a Gladiator Beast monster, since Prisma copies the name. You can tag the Prisma out with Test Tiger's effect to summon a Darius from your deck, Darius reborning the Bestiary, immediately letting you make your Gaiceras play. Test Tiger in tandem with Prisma allows your deck to be very explosive when you need to, which is an important tool you need to have in your deck to combat your opponent when they go off. And for the last monster in our deck, I play 1 copy of Rescue Cat. Rescue Cat is sort of like a Prisma Test Tiger by itself. Before this card got banned and eventually errataed to being a much more strict card, you were able to summon 2 level 3 beasts from your deck and not negate their effects. So with Cat, you summon Sam Knight and Test Tiger, then you tag these 2 out for any GB of your choice. So it should be pretty obvious why you played the Cat. Then for the spells, I have 3 copies of Book of Moon. I think Book of Moon is the best non-engine card in the Gladiator Beast deck, because you can use Book of Moon both offensively and defensively. As we talked about before, a common play you end up doing is when you summon the Sekidor by a GB's effect, you protect this with your traps, and then you can attack your opponent with the Sekidor and Book of Moon their monster. Thus, when your Sekidor attacks a defense position monster, it survives, and you can use its effect to summon 2 GBs from your deck. Book of Moon is also very good against the Frog deck, because you can book a dupe Frog, attack into the face-up dupe Frog, and get your effects off. Against the Gigavise deck, you can use Book of Moon on Gigaplant after they use Supervise on it, which can be quite disruptive. You can also use Book of Moon on any Blackwing normal summon. If they have Whirlwind, they don't get the search because they cannot check for the attack stats. So yeah, I think free Book of Moon is a must in the Gladiator Beast deck, and it is much better than Shrink because it's actually a real disruptive card. Then, as I alluded to before, I am playing Gladiator Proving Ground. This can search any of the Gladiator Beast monsters, and it's a spell card, so they cannot put it back into your deck with Trap Dust Shoot. If you clogged on monsters, you can also set this card as a bluff, forcing the game to go on if they were to play around your back row. But why Proving Ground is so good in this deck is because you can search Bestiary on command, which is needed to summon your Gaiceras. You can also search for an 1800 monster to run over cards like Bora or Dark Refer. Not only that, you can also search for Retiari. Retiari being 1200 attack allows you to bypass Bottomless Trap Hole. So Proving Ground is just a really good starter for your deck, allowing you to grab any GB you need for the situation. I'm not playing 3 copies though, because I was already at the monster count that I was comfortable with. I don't want to play more monsters because you don't want to draw too many monsters. And I don't want to cut any of the GB names either. I don't want to cut a Quest, I don't want to cut a Darius because that'll make me lose in the grind game. Nor do I really want to cut Prisma because he's just really good with Test Tiger. So I felt 2 Proving Ground was perfect. And then to remove their back row, I play 1 copy of Heavy Storm and 1 copy of Mystical Space Typhoon. Despite being a trap deck, I do play Heavy because it does deal with their Black Whirlwind and allows you to push through what they have. A lot of the time, if your back row is comprised of cards that are not necessarily needed for the game state, or if you have cards like War Chariot which you can just add back for free, or if you have more back row in your hand, you can just heavy their back row away and get your plays through. I decided to main deck MST despite we're still being in a draw trap meta with the Blackwing deck. Because of the aforementioned combo decks being Gigavise and Frogs, Royal Oppression has started picking up in play in the main deck, so I really wanted to have the MST in my main deck to at least give me 4 outs to the Royal Oppression. Then for the trap cards, I'm playing 2 copies of Trap Stun in the main deck. The 2 Trap Stun, the Heavy and the MST, along with Solemn Judgment in the main deck, does give me 5 total outs for a Royal Oppression, but only 4 of them being able to be used on a preemptively flipped Oppression. I felt this ratio was completely fine. I really want to respect Royal Oppression for game 1, but I also have to take into consideration the combo decks. I am citing the 3rd Trap Stun, but I wasn't comfortable putting the 3rd copy in the main deck with so much Frogs and Gigavise running around. Additionally, having the MST in my main deck made side decking plans a bit easier, seeing as Edison format is such a diverse format, you really want as many side deck slots as you can have. Then for the other traps, I play 2 copies of War Chariot. This card is pretty bad into established fields and it's not that great against Blackwings. And it's also a card, once you see it, you can usually just loop it back with a quest. So that's why I'm only main decking 2 copies of Chariot at the moment. But my side deck has the 3rd copy for the matchups that I really want to see this card as early as possible in. Then I have 2 copies of Dimensional Prison. You may think Deep Prison is an auto-include in this deck, because you can banish your opponent's monster and then allow your GB to tag out. But the issue with Battle Traps in this deck is your opponent often does not even want to attack you, because I'm also playing 2 copies of Waboku. In case you have Waboku or a prison face down, if your opponent has their own dimensional prison, they may be inclined not to attack, because if they attack into your Waboku, then you get to tag out your GB. However, if they're forcing you to attack, they can then prison your Gladiator Beast monster, thus making them safe from their Waboku if they attack next turn into your empty field. So interestingly enough, battle traps are actually sometimes to your detriment in this deck, when you play against better players and they just refuse to attack you directly unless they have multiple ways to push through. So yeah, 2 copies of Waboku is a really good card when they attack into you or when you attack into them. 2 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole. Despite Bottomless not being a very good draw into an established field, as opposed to Deep Prison can be, Bottomless deals with Bryanak, Dark Arm Dragon and Blackwing normal summons, thus making it much better than Dimensional Prison. 1 copy of Starlight Road, 1 copy of Solemn Judgment. You want some cards in this deck to save you from their blowouts like Heavy Storm or Icarus Attack. And with Road you can also summon multiple Gladiator Beast monsters to play through their Dimensional Prison, without fear of losing to a Mirror Force or Torrential, which I'm also playing 1 copy each of. These are very good traps in Edison format, therefore I'm playing them. 1 copy of Trap Dust Shoot. Despite being a slow deck, being able to have perfect information for your opponent's hand, at least for those few turns, until they draw into enough cards where the information doesn't matter anymore. Sometimes you just need that 1 turn to be able to go off, and knowing that they don't have any back rows can allow you to do that. And 1 copy of Compulsory Evacuation Device. Being an all-around good trap, and a pretty good card you can just naturally just set into anything really. If they use Heavy Storm for their push, you can bounce back your GB to save it. You can use Compulse after you attack in Battle Step, thus they can no longer use a Battle Trap like Mirror Force or Deep Prison on your replay, and you can force a tag out. It's also a good card to answer Stardust Dragon or any Vayu Synchro. And you can even bounce a Dupe Frog in a pinch to allow your GB to attack into their other Dupe Frog against Dupe Lock. And then for the extra deck, I play a bunch of Synchros, most of which do not matter. I'm playing 1 copy of Ally of Justice Cataster as my level 5, 1 copy of Bryanak Dragon of the Ice Barrier, and 1 copy of Goyo Guardian as my level 6s, 1 copy of Black Rose Dragon as my level 7, 1 copy of Thoughtful Archfiend as my 1 level 8, and then 1 copy of Stardust Dragon as my 2nd level 8. This one actually being able to be summoned with Starlight Road. So why am I playing these 5 Synchros with no tuners in my deck? Well, the rest of the extra deck is just fusion monsters for your Gladiator Beasts or Cyber Dragon with Chimera Tech. There is the off chance your opponent's playing Creature Swap and they might give you a tuner, therefore you can synchro into a Synchro monster. And it's also extremely foolish to play anything less than 15 in your extra deck, because then your opponent knows you're on Gladiator Beast, or at least not any of the good decks, because your extra deck is not 15. So irregardless if you're ever gonna summon these cards in your GB deck, your extra deck should be 15 cards, and why not fill it with Synchros, which you can actually summon through a Creature Swap. So for the fusion monsters that actually matter, 3 copies of Gaiceris. I've never in my life summoned 3, but on the off chance you do, I'm playing 3 copies. 3 copies of Heraclinos. Again, you should never need the 3rd Heraclinos, but on the off chance that you do, why not play 3 copies? Summoning Heraclinos backed up with back row can be a very daunting field for your opponent, because you can just negate any of the real counterplay and use your traps on their monsters. And then 3 copies of Chimeratic Fortress Dragon. For the side deck I have 1 copy of Hoplimus. When you summon this with a GB effect, it gets a stat boost, similar to Laquari, but for defense. Hoplimus goes up to 2400, not being able to be run over by a Caius or an Armed Wing. I tend to not bring this in against Blackwing, because they have a lot of other ways to answer your monsters. And most of their ways to deal with a Laquari, 2100, would also deal with Hoplimus. But this card is good against Hero Beat and Vayu Turbo. 2 copies of DD Crow. Having hand traps in a deck like this is very good when you play against the combo decks, because when they use their sweeper like Trunid or Heavy Storm dealing with your back row, you can use DD Crow to counteract their push. Then I play 2 copies of Cyber Dragon. The Gladiator Beast deck has a threshold of 1800. That means that anything bigger than that you cannot naturally run over with your engine. So having a good monster that can contact fuse away your opponent's Cyber Valleys or Machina monsters for Fortress, while also being a good beat stick, is very good in a deck like this. Then I side 2 copies of Dimensional Fissure. I'm playing D-Fissure instead of Macro because of War Chariot. Also, when you draw this into an established field, you can activate this card immediately, while with Macro you would have to wait a turn. Most of the cards you want to banish are monster cards anyway. The fact that the D-Fissure is face up and your opponent knows about it doesn't really change that much. If you chain Macrocosmos to a swap frog effect to send, sure, they banish 1 frog from their deck. That doesn't really matter. But the D-Fissure being able to be activatable immediately is a much better card than Macrocosmos in this format. Then I side 2 copies of Ancient Forest. Ancient Forest is good against the Vayu Turbo deck and Amaryllis. Against Vayu you can flip up their cards like Raikou or Hamster, and also saves you from them attacking you. Similar against Amaryllis, however most people have caught on now and they've cut Raikou from their deck in favor of Cyber Valley. So against the Cyber Valley version of Amaryllis, Ancient Forest does get worse. So against the Valley variant, I'm not sure that I would actually bring in Ancient Forests, but I would actually bring in Cyber Dragons instead because of Cyber Valley. And then some more ways to deal with Titanial, 2 copies of Smashing Ground, the 3rd Trap Stun, the 3rd War Chariot, and 2 copies of Trap Hole. Trap Hole is good against the Blackwing deck because when you remove their normal summon, they cannot search with Whirlwind, and you really just want to keep them off monsters, so your GBs are free to go through. If you enjoy my content, make sure to also subscribe to my second channel, linked in the description box down below. There I'll be posting more personalized and exclusive content.